I want to welcome to the airwaves our buddy, great litigator, Jim Trusty, Jim of the IFRA law firm. So we had Mershon here right before he came on the air. He issued an opinion this evening, apparently, saying that no, immunity is not an issue in this case involving Trump. Everything regarding the hush money issue was purely private. What do you make of that?
I mean, it's totally predictable. Everything about that trial was unrecognizable if you care about due process and fair play. So I wasn't really banking on Judge Mershon to sprout a conscience when it comes to a trial that it was full of error. And I think it goes to the point you were making after that, which is, you've got to decide as a litigator, as somebody on behalf of President Trump, do we let this whole thing run its course unimpeded in state court in the hopes that the appellate judges throw this thing out, which I think they will eventually, or do you look for some sort of federal option? And is there any harm in trying to look for a federal option, which I think is the right way to look at it?
Now, this pardon stuff that Joe Biden's been doing, you have some knowledge about this. You have an opinion about this, don't you?
Yeah, well, didn't think I was going to have a war story on this, Mark, but I do. I was starting to hear about how all of these nonviolent offender commutations and pardons were actually coming off pretty badly. There was the Kids for Cash corrupt mayor in Scranton, Pennsylvania, who got a pardon. There were apparently Chinese spies. And so I actually looked at the list. And believe it or not, the first time I scaled through that list just to see about if there's any big names from that I was familiar with or that I had prosecuted, I didn't see this name. I think maybe I was in denial that it could ever be a possibility. But I got the electronic notice from the Maryland Federal Court when I was a prosecutor there, about Josephine Gray, who I prosecuted with another prosecutor in 2001. She had killed 3 different men over a 25-year period and was so scary and successful in her murderous ways that we could never get a state case together. I was actually at the state's attorney's office when the second of those murders occurred. I know they tried to pull together a murder case. They just couldn't do it. People wouldn't cooperate. Family members wouldn't cross her. Everybody was afraid of her. But when I was a Fed, we decided to make a run at her under a wire and mail fraud theory of the Slayer's rule, that you can't profit from life insurance if you participated in a death, which she did on 3 occasions. So we put together this very challenging case, got a 40-year sentence, maxed her out under the statutes we had, and then I found out this week that she got a commutation from Joe Biden. So supposedly she's a nonviolent offender, Mark.
Do you know the basis for this? I mean, it's incredible to me.
No, I know that she kind of cried poor about being physically ill for a long time. She got herself transferred within the Bureau of Prisons to a medical facility some time ago, probably 10 years ago. And more recently, she had gotten herself released on home detention. And for him to come in at this point and cut her home detention by half a year is kind of astounding. I mean, I don't know who was championing this. I know that a lot of people lost a lot of sleep and had a lot of grief about Josephine Gray for a long time when she was known as the Black Widow murderer. And for some reason, she got on the list. I can't figure that one out to save my life.
Don't you suspect, though, that the lawyer knew somebody in the White House or the lawyer knew somebody who knew somebody in the White House? Isn't that how a lot of these go down?
Well, when you're intent on setting a record and doing 1,500 of them in one swoop, and
unbelievable.
I don't think with this administration we're done. I think this was actually a bit of a trial balloon or a distraction from what's going to happen over the next couple of weeks. But you do wonder. I mean, I understand. Look, pardon is a legitimate power. There's times where it makes sense to be merciful or to undo some sort of historical wrong, like the Jack Johnson prosecutions of the old famous boxer Jack Johnson. I mean, There's moments where it makes sense. But to sit there and take someone who was engaged in murder and pretend that it's nonviolent because of the nature of the federal charges we cobbled together, you have to wonder what the connection is. And certainly it's a little more self-evident when you're talking about Chinese spies. Why would Joe Biden ever do anything to commute or pardon Chinese spies if there wasn't the ongoing problem of his family's wealth and his family's being compromised?
He owed them. That's the main reason. I mean, they wanted something for their money, and they got it. And in addition, there was a corrupt judge. There were 2 of them, actually, in the case that you mentioned, and the mayor throwing these young kids in for these long sentences for drinking it illegally and stuff like that. They give him 8 months and things of that. So just outrageous. And but Biden seems impervious to all this, doesn't he?
Well, again, it's the question we've had for a couple of years, which is how much of this is Joe Biden directly, and how much of this are people, pulling the levers from behind the scenes. I don't know. That corrupt judge of all places was from Scranton. So you'd think that Biden would at least have some knowledge. I mean, he purports to be Scranton Joe. You think he'd have some knowledge of a judge who was profiting by putting kids in prison where they otherwise wouldn't. I mean, can you imagine being a family member, your kid got picked up for whatever, drinking in public, and he's suddenly in a prison, a hellhole, because of a corrupt judge getting money for those referrals. And then to hear later that this president decides to cut that guy slack and give him a pardon is just astounding. I mean, this is that president who kept talking about rule of law with Hunter Biden's pardon, and he has blown that to complete obliteration at this point.
Now, you went nose to nose for a while there with Jack Smith. Now, he's not completely shutting shop, is he? He's got co-defendants in some of these cases, and they're still pursuing them, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, I think that will have the effect of forcing the president into a pardon for the two gentlemen that are indicted with him were indicted with him on the Mar-a-Lago case. And to me, that's really kind of sick. The only reason Walt Nauta and Carlos de Oliveira got prosecuted in the first place was to pressure them into flipping against President Trump. It's really that clear. From the inside, I can tell you that's all that was going on. The government, Jack Smith, thought these were guys that might be able to deliver them President Trump on a platter. So they went hard, pressured him, failed, and now they're still trying to go up against them in the Court of Appeals on the 11th Circuit.
We're here with our friend Jim Trusty, litigator extraordinaire with the IFRA legal group. Jim Trusty, had you ever heard much about preemptive pardons before? I mean, I knew they existed, but I don't remember them being front of mind. Do you?
Oh, sure. I remember the case from the Reconstruction in the 1860s every time I walk around. So, yeah, there is, a 5-4 Supreme Court decision from like 1871 or something that seems to condone the notion of it. And of course, Gerald Ford in pardoning Nixon, you could call that a preemptive pardon as well. I don't think that the historical precedents are, number one, totally without the possibility of challenging them someday. But number two, I don't think they were what's intended when you talk about what's happened with Hunter Biden and with some of the behavior of this administration.
Yeah, the thing is, I mean, I know it's never been applied the way they're thinking of applying it. Anybody who might be charged by the next administration. I know Carter did it for draft dodgers, Washington. I mean, I've looked at all this stuff. This would be wholly different than what's come before. And I just don't think they give a damn. They're probably figuring, well, catch me if you can, and you can't catch me, I'm out of here. Pretty lawless.
Yeah, it is. And the problem is it's going to be really improbable to see a challenge to a pardon like that because the deterrence is pretty strong. If you're a prosecutor, you're not going to invest a bunch of time going after somebody who at least superficially seems to be pardoned.
No, and I think the court will uphold it. They won't like it, but that's a plenary power. I don't see any limitation to it in any other respect. I mean, it's going to be a problem, but this is the problem, isn't it, with the left in many respects? They push the envelope, then they go over the edge of the envelope. I think Smith did a lot of this, which is why you had to keep going to the Supreme Court on immunity issues and other issues, and then they pushed the 14th Amendment to a ridiculous point where they're trying to move Trump from the ballot. This is kind of more of the same, don't you think?
It is. I mean, look, this is all just lawfare. It is this concerted effort to say, well, here's who we're targeting. How do we get there? Let's keep him off the ballot. Let's get rid of his executive privilege. Let's get rid of his attorney-client privilege. Everything that comes from the left, and you could really trace it back, I think, to the impeachments where they cheapened the currency of impeachment. They've decided because it's Donald Trump, they have to take extraordinary acts. They have to be inventive. And that degrades the law and the criminal justice system and even the pardon process when they keep making their own exceptions because of the devil they see on the other side of the aisle.
You're 100% right. You're listening to Jim Trusty with the IFRA Legal Group. He's absolutely fantastic. Jim, thank you, my man. I appreciate it. Have a great, great holiday.
You too. Great talking to you, Mark.
You too.